Hey there, welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, where we're expanding the natural family planning conversation. I'm your host, Ellen Holloway. Before we jump into today's topic, I want to let you know that this episode is cut in half. So this is the first half of our conversation about IVF, and next week we will share the second half. In this first half, we talk a little bit more on the physical side of IVF. And then in next week's episode, we are going to dive into kind of the more moral, theological aspects of IVF. All right, we are welcoming Melissa Buchan to the podcast, and we're going to be talking about IVF today. I am so excited to have this conversation, dive in a little bit. This is the first time that we've discussed IVF on this podcast, and I don't think it's going to be the last. I'm really, really excited to have Melissa here. Melissa, welcome.
Hey there, Ellen. It's a pleasure to be here, and I am also looking forward to today's conversation.
Awesome. So, Melissa, would you start by just giving us a little introduction to yourself? You do so many things and wear lots of hats. So I know our listeners would love to hear about some of the things you do.
Yeah, so I am a neofertility advisor and a board certified health and wellness coach, and the co-founder of the Chart Neo app, which is an app that anybody can download to use for charting their cycles and fertility.
Yeah, the Chart Neo app is really cool. It's because it's HIPAA compliant. And
yeah, it's compatible right now, but we are filing for compliancy, which is a whole huge process. But yeah, I mean, it's a super secure app. But there's so many apps on the market, and you're giving a lot of really sensitive, intimate data. So one of our main priorities in the app is that our customers know their data is secure. So we're never mining it out, giving it to any third parties. There isn't any advertising. We're a small team, a Catholic physician, myself, and our software developer. And we're really building this so that women have a tool that they can trust for authentic cycle charting.
That's awesome. And I'll put a link to more info on the Chart Neo app in the show notes if you are interested in learning a little bit more about that. So, so today we're talking IVF. So let's just start with kind of a brief overview of what IVF means and just kind of like the basic mechanics of like what is an IVF procedure?
Yeah. So IVF is kind of under that broad category of assisted reproductive technologies, and it stands for in vitro fertilization, and it's the pathway that many women and couples take if they are struggling with infertility or the inability to get pregnant. Unfortunately, a lot of women, just from my experience in working in this area for over 15 years, a lot of women are really just kind of pressured and pushed into that avenue without thorough workups or evaluations of why they're not able to achieve a pregnancy. So I do think it's important. IVF is not my area of specialty. It's really the restorative alternative to IVF that is my wheelhouse. But if we're going to talk about the restorative option, I think it's first important that we do have that conversation about, well, what is IVF and how does it work? So I think it might be best if we just kind of break it down simply into kind of like the 5 basic steps that are involved. And the first one, so because I don't want to get too techie. I mean, like we could get into the science all day, but I just want to kind of talk high level here.
We could talk for a long time, but we'll keep it kind of high level just for anyone who's more or less unfamiliar with IVF, or I think a lot of us have heard the term IVF. Maybe we know someone, maybe ourselves, like we know we were conceived via IVF, but we don't even really know like what the process is or what that even means.
Great. Yeah. So that's a great place to start from. So it starts out, we'll just kind of start with the basic, anatomy and physiology of a male and a female. So for pregnancy to occur, first conception has to occur, and that's the union of a sperm and an egg. Typically this happens through intercourse. So with IVF, we're really removing intercourse from that process. So in the IVF process, ovulation is actually, you go through the process of ovulation through what's called a superovulation. So you are given a series of drugs and hormones to hyperstimulate the ovaries. So rather than producing 1, 2, or 3 mature eggs, you are producing a large number of eggs. And then those eggs are removed from the ovaries through a basic surgical procedure. So you have the eggs outside of the ovaries. And so that's the female kind of contribution to the project. And then you need to collect the sperm from the man. And of course, again, as I mentioned, IVF is done outside of an active intercourse. So typically, this is done through masturbation. And so, we could talk about the moral and ethical ramifications of that. So Ellen, we are talking about this from the Catholic worldview.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I think it's really important to understand that. So we've got a red flag there already that the sperm is being produced through kind of an illicit means of masturbation. And I just kind of want to put a pause on this. It is really important to understand the integrity of a sperm analysis if you are struggling with infertility. It's also important to note that there are moral and ethical ways to do this. I'm excited to offer one of those in the program that I offer. I just started offering at-home sperm analysis kits that are done totally within the ethical and moral guidelines for this to not be something that's questioning against your moral or ethical beliefs. So. Right. So first of all, so we've got the sperm now. So the sperm are washed and analyzed and are prepared. Only the healthiest ones are extracted. And then we have, what we kind of typically think as conception, where the sperm and the egg are united. But this is done outside of the womb. And then those embryos kind of grow and they will analyze, okay, which ones are the healthiest and the most viable. And then they actually transfer the embryos into the uterus. And typically it's not 1 or 2, but it is a number of them because the viability is not great. Like the likelihood of any embryo actually taking hold and conception turning into a pregnancy, there's a low percentage of viability there. So they do often insert a large number of embryos. And this is why we often see, multiples, and then couples are often pressured for a selective reduction, which is kind of the nice, gentle way of saying, a selective abortion where maybe you had 4 embryos take, but there's a lot of risk in a high multiple pregnancy. And so then often women are pressured to reduce that number to 2 or maybe 3, I guess, if they could convince the doctor. Again, a very difficult and challenging process. So that's kind of walking through the process of what IVF looks like.
Wow. I didn't actually really know that process. I kind of knew the idea of like, okay, eggs and sperm outside and, and then you fertilize them basically and then reinsert, I guess. That's a terrible way to talk about it. But I didn't actually know about like the taking drugs to get like a super ovulation. That's really interesting. How many, I'm curious, how many eggs are they like looking for to get?
Again, this is not my specialty, so I really don't know. But we could go back to the context of what we do know of a normal, healthy ovulatory cycle. So it typically takes so when a female is born, she has all of the eggs she will ever have.
Right.
Whereas a man, once he hits puberty, will start producing sperm. So he's constantly producing sperm. We're born with an egg reserve. We hit maturity, and then each menstrual cycle, we on average release 1 egg. But that journey of the egg starts about 3 cycles prior. It's about 100 to 120 day process from follicular recruitment, where multiple eggs, or when I say eggs, I'm meaning immature eggs or follicles. Those are selected to reach maturity. So it's a race. So you've got all of these undeveloped follicles going through the maturation process. And then as ovulation to make it to the actual ovulatory event where it is released. And then if intercourse occurs around the time that ovulation occurs, the sperm and the egg can unite for a natural conception. So that's the normal process. So hyperstimulation of the ovaries for the IVF procedure, it's a risky procedure. There are a lot of potential health risks involved with that. and you could have a large number of follicles that are trying to reach that stage of maturity where they can be extracted. So important to recognize that. Some of the drugs that are used in IVF are actually also used with restorative reproductive medicine or NAPRO technology, but at a much gentler, kind of almost therapeutic level. So you're only stimulating the ovary to do what it's naturally supposed to do, which is to take a group of follicles and help select a dominant follicle to reach that that level of ovulation.
Right, right. Wow, that is so interesting. Okay, so we're going to kind of break IVF down a little bit now, and we're going to start with the physical side, and then we're going to jump into kind of the theological perspective. So we're just going to talk first on the physical side, like why IVF is not really that effective of a method of treating infertility. And I think there's a lot of this to it. And one of those that just like sticks in my head immediately, which isn't even about the physical, is just how expensive it is. It's so much more expensive than many other much more natural ways of restoring fertility.
Yeah. And Ellen, this is something that I'm going to share with you that was really eye-opening to me. It is expensive in the United States, but in most areas of the world that have socialized medicine, it is subsidized by the government. So it's actually cheaper to go through multiple rounds of IVF than it is to take a restorative approach.
That is really interesting. I did not know that. Wow.
Wow is right.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Now we have an even bigger problem on our hands.
Yes.
All right. So let's talk about the physical side. So why is it that IVF isn't actually all that effective? I mean, the rate of effectiveness is actually very low. I don't want to throw out a number because I don't actually know.
When you asked about a number, I had a feeling you were going to ask me this. And so I Googled it and I stopped following the number because back when I did my initial training and I used to give like talks at my local parish, I think the number was around like 35%. I remember throwing that out there one time and there was a skeptic in the back of the room who was Googling it. He's like, it's actually 37.8%. I'm like, okay.
Oh my gosh.
So I think like in 2021, I don't know, it's anywhere from probably 35 to 50% effective. Again, it depends on, of course, the clinic that you go to, and these technologies are always evolving. But I think that it's safe to say that in 2021, IVF is no longer cutting edge technology. Like it's really not that difficult of a process. If I can I'm just going to talk very practical here and remove, the ethical and moral components. Practically speaking, it's not that hard to get an egg and a sperm and unite them to create life. Mm-hmm. And that has been done for years in agriculture, in farming industry. And shouldn't be a surprise that we can transfer that to humans as well. So that's not the hard part. The difficult part that makes it not super effective and not a way to treat infertility is that, you can have this life, but if the host, if the mama is not in optimal health, then the likelihood of conception is probably rather low. And that is, I think, one of the red flags of IVF is that they're just kind of looking at getting that egg and sperm together and putting it inside the womb, the uterus. But we have to look at the overall integrity of the uterus, but then also the host, like the person itself. So if the mama is not in a good state of health, or if there is an underlying health condition, if inflammation is an issue in the body, if there's undetected endometriosis, if there's a major hormonal imbalance, then that new life doesn't have a good setup to flourish during a pregnancy. And that's something that I've seen again and again, where women are put down this road of IVF with little to no workup of their overall health.
Yeah. I think what this is bringing our conversation to is like root cause, right? They're sent down this path of IVF without really looking at the health of what's going on. And I think that's really interesting what you were saying is like, yeah, it's not that hard. If we take out the moral, ethical, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Yeah, it's not that hard to like put a sperm and an egg together and we have life done. But okay, so like let's bake a cake here. It's not that hard to like put the ingredients you need together for your cake. But if you have an oven that doesn't work, you're not going to get a cake. You won't.
That's a great analogy. That's pretty
great. It's not going to work.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's like, what are some of why is IVF often used? Well, we see it used a lot with women who are older. And so there may be fertility issues. Like we know once we hit around 35, fertility starts fertility starts to drastically diminish. And we also see just in today's current culture that women are waiting later in life to start their families.
Yeah.
And so they just automatically go the IVF route. There is actually a lot of work that you can do on yourself to help with the integrity of the eggs. A lot of times we think, okay, our ovarian reserve diminishes and they're just old eggs and we can't do anything. There are lifestyle adjustments and supplements that you can take to help the quality of the egg and the quality of the ovulation. So I think that's important. There may be a structural issue such as blocked fallopian tubes, especially in the area of restorative reproductive medicine and nanotechnology. A good trained surgeon should be able to say, okay, can we resolve this issue?
Mm-hmm.
Women with endometriosis, untreated endometriosis is a big issue for infertility. And so working with either a specialist who knows how to focus on lifestyle factors to help manage endometriosis, as well as surgical techniques for full excision removal. That's really the gold standard for treatment. And then polycystic ovarian disease, that I always get a little bit upset when women with PCOS are put down the path of IVF, because it's one of the most, if we're talking about reversing or optimizing fertility, PCOS, if you do the right things and have the right support, IVF is not needed. I will just say that. And then male infertility and low sperm count. Well, okay, yeah. I mean, there are things that men can do to help improve their sperm. Sperm is one of those things where men are constantly regenerating them. And so it's amazing how a couple of lifestyle tweaks can help regenerate good, healthy sperm, rather than just keep doing what you're doing and we'll get those guys in a test tube and we'll just, try to get the best ones. So I think a lot of this, as I'm walking through it, is making me realize it's so much about mindset and kind of like our medicalization of the whole process of building a family and getting pregnant. And I just want to challenge listeners to maybe think more holistically and view the couple as each individual as an integrated self, and then an integrated self in the context of a couple and the combined fertility of a couple.
Right. Well, and I think if you're thinking like holistically, okay, there is a reason why the natural process of pregnancy is not occurring. There is some reason. So instead of trying to just like go around that reason, like, doesn't it make sense to try to fix the reason? If we go back to my like kind of silly oven analogy, like, okay, well, let's plug the oven in instead of like trying to, I don't know, pre-bake the cake and then put it in the oven or something. This is where my analogy falls apart.
Yeah, it's rather than circumventing the issue, why can we kind of explore and see what the root cause of the issue is? I remember, so I studied biology in college, and I remember, going through my very first anatomy and physiology lesson of female reproductive system, and just this whole thought process. Once you get into the details and the intricacy of the process of how does anyone ever get pregnant, like so many things have to line up. So if any one of those processes is off kilter or off balance or not present, it's not a surprise that women are struggling with infertility. And actually infertility is at an all-time high. We're seeing it. I just bought a book talking about this whole issue, and I'm even scared to read it. Like it is a real thing. And so I think that we need to like really be mindful of this for our generation, but for our children's generation, of making sure that we're creating lifestyles and home environments and teaching about health and wellness, so that so that fertility is not compromised, so that women don't have to make these first of all, experience the painful experience of infertility, but then have to fight against the pressure of the IVF culture.
Right. Because it is, I feel like it's extremely ingrained in our culture. And I feel like there's very few, and again, we're going to talk theological in just a little bit, but there are very few groups that think about it from that theological perspective. And so it's so ingrained in our culture that that's just what you do. If you're not getting pregnant naturally, then obviously like you're going to go do IVF. I mean, there's a couple of other things as well, but like, that's like the first thing people think of. That's what people suggest. Yeah. That's,
yeah. And Ellen, and I don't want to get myself in trouble on this podcast, but even again, I've been in this line of work for almost 17 years now. Even well-meaning Catholic doctors will encourage patients to go the IVF route because they feel helpless. They see the pain in their patients. They want to help them. And maybe for whatever reason, they push them down that avenue. And so you could have a well-meaning Catholic couple who unites or connects with their physician, maybe on a faith front. So it's somebody of authority that they trust, and they have this faith connection, and they're encouraging them to go the IVF process. I think this is a huge scandal that we have in the church. And I don't exactly know what the reason is. It may be misinformation. It may be that the doctors aren't informed. And I would say shame on the church for that, for not educating the church people on the issues involved around IVF. And again, I know we're going to dig into that in a minute, but I just want to kind of call it for what it is. I feel like sometimes it's the elephant in the room, but it's something that I've experienced all too often.
Thanks so much for listening. Again, if it felt like that was a very abrupt ending, that's because this is part one of a 2-part episode series. And next week, we are going to dive into the rest of this conversation. At this point in the conversation, we take a turn toward the moral theological side. So that is what we are going to be diving into next week on Monday. Links are in the show notes to the things that I mentioned in this episode, and links to connect with Melissa, as well as myself, if you have any questions or comments. Until next time.